Welcome to That's Pretty Neat with Rodger and Stefan, where we discuss neat, holistic, regenerative agriculture.
So in this segment, I think what the idea is to just show people what we're doing in holistic planned grazing, where we, in the growing season, we're not planning for the grazing, we're planning for the recovery period. So we're going to show people what we've got roughly 20 days of recovery that we've done this growing season. So the beginning was we gave everything 6 weeks to start growing while we went into the drought reserve. Then once everything was up and established, then you've started going around and you've been doing that for roughly 20 days.
Yes.
The cattle were here yesterday and they've now moved to that paddock today. And this was grazed for 1.5 days. So this is 1.5 days recovery. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to just come in close and look at some of the broadleafs and legumes that were grazed here. And then we're just going to go and look at the grass that was grazed when they first came in here a day and a half ago, which was over here. And so you can see all the leaves are being cut, but there is already some regrowth occurring.
Yep.
And that's just 1.5 days later. So that's what we're looking at on the grass and legumes and broadleafs. Yeah, let's go and look at day 2.
So we've moved to a pasture that's had 2 days rest now.
Okay, fantastic. So almost to our eyes, almost doesn't look any different.
No.
So this is 2 days recovery on the grasses. That obviously wasn't grazed much. You can see the same biting and and where the broadleafs were grazed, it looks fairly similar at 2 days, not much of a difference. Okay, Let's go to the next one.
This pasture we moved out of about 4 days ago.
Okay, so this is 4 days recovery. I can see a little bit of scar tissue on this thistle. These brassicas look like they've grown up subsequent to the thing. The grasses are over here. We can see some nice regrowth on nipped leaves, and you can see definitely it's looking like it's recovering right here in front. This is pretty good growth. You know it was grazed because you can see the dry tips.
Yep.
So already with 4 days of recovery, I mean that's already looking quite good. So let's go and look at some older recovery now.
Let's do it.
Okay, so this is an interesting paddock. We've chosen to show you 5 days of recovery. So you can start seeing quite a bit of regrowth on these leaves, but you can still see the trampling. You can see a lot of dew on the ground. There hasn't been any rain in, 8-9 weeks?
Yep.
So there hasn't been any rain, but there's so much stored soil moisture and dew at night that it's condensing and coming on. I think we're, 11, 12 o'clock during the day. So it's well into the day, but there's still moisture. Yeah. But we can see, the recovery, all these nice new green shoots, and this is at day 5.
Day 5.
And then the legumes and the broadleafs are basically not showing any hardship one way or another. I mean, the lettuce is sprouting up again, and not too much impact.
No.
Not too much of the forage was grazed. So that's day 5 recovery.
5.
So over here we've got 7 days of recovery. Now this particular spot is where the herd lay down and chewed their cud or slept. So still seeing the cut off things. It's starting to grow up again, but 7 days later a lot of the stuff that was flattened is still pretty flat. But also more interestingly, so in the shade of this valley, 7 days later this dung is still totally wet. So there's been very little evaporation of moisture 7 days later.
Pretty
and
cool.
You can see quite a bit of regrowth here. 7 days, even though it might be growing flat, it's still growing. Okay, so here not too much growth here.
No.
But this is 8 days recovery. However, in some spots the recovery's been amazing. These thistles are really taking off. Ouch, that hurts. But you can see where they were grazed. This grass is growing up quite nicely. It was all grazed. The thistles were grazed. You can see where the leaves were bitten off. There's big grazing up there in front. But this is 8 days recovery.
Yeah.
And then some patches not as impressive, but that's 8 days of recovery. So here we are at 10 days recovery. On some of the plants now, it's really starting to get hard to tell what was grazed and what wasn't. But if we look closely, we can still see the flat heads of the grasses where they were grazed, but now they're starting to get disguised by the leaves that have no evidence of grazing on them. So you see leaves with no evidence of grazing next to leaves with evidence of grazing. So this is at the day 10 mark.
Wow.
And we've got quite a bit of growth, but we're also now starting to get that exponential growth of the what we call a recovered plant. So this plant at day 10 now is getting to the point where it's just starting to now send root energy back into the roots. So we're beginning the process now.
Cool.
But just right at the beginning of day 10. And so now it's getting harder to see what was grazed and what wasn't. So you can see what was severely grazed over there is still kind of dormant. So when we get 50% or more grazed off, then the plants can sit for up to 18 days without even starting to grow to make sure that the herd has moved off. So those ones that were severely grazed are still thinking about regrowing, but the ones that weren't so severely grazed have decided that it's safe to regrow. Yeah. Okay, so here I just wanted to stop. So this is 12 days of recovery on giant rye. And all these grasses have germinated and grown under where we had ultra high density grazing to break up this this matter and get sunlight and growth going in. Now let's go and look at where there was actually some grass. So here we've got 12 days recovery without grazing. I can see a couple of little nips, so this was all grazed, but that's 12 days of recovery. For these grasses where the cattle had previously trampled it in the dry season.
Right, this looks kind of like the midpoint, I'd say.
I'd say this is the midpoint of recovery. So we've looked at the 1 day recovery. We've also looked at the 24-day recovery. This is 15 days. And as you can see, plants are pretty tall. That's knee high already.
Yeah, wow.
But you can see that leaf is cut, it's been grazed. You can see these ones were grazed. So we've got some that you can't really see were grazed, but some that you can. Whereas when we get out to the 22, you almost can't see anything. So we're right at that midpoint now. So it's not time to come back and graze because you can still see a lot was grazed.
Yep.
Despite the fact that it's knee high.
Yeah, wow.
So we don't make the decision to come back and say we've had enough recovery based on the height of the plants. We really have to wait until you physically can't see it, which you'll see later in the video where we get out into the 20 days. Yeah. But at 15 days, we're right in the middle. Where it was trampled flat, I can see old hoof marks. The plants are growing well. It looks like the deer are in here thick. The broadleafs, you can't see that they were grazed. But if I look down at the bottom, I can see where the original leaves were grazed.
Yeah, wow.
The thistles here, what's that called? Stinging nettles are here. They've all recovered. They don't even look like they were grazed, but we know this was all grazed flat.
Yep.
The wild lettuce is coming back. So when we let the land recover, it appreciates the break, but this is not quite ready to start putting energy back into the roots.
Yep.
But it's right at that break point. Now, this is normally when overgrazing would occur because it's not ready to send energy back into the roots. But everyone who's just thinking about the condition of their cows would say, "Ooh, that's so green and lush. Let's bring the cows here to eat it." So this is too soon a point in the recovery to come back.
Yeah.
Even though it looks fantastic forage-wise, and your cows would get really fat, you would be hurting your land if you came back now.
It wouldn't be good.
So as neat as it looks, you need to be patient. Okay, so here we've got 18 days of recovery in a very small little valley in amongst a lot of shrubs.
Yeah.
So there would have been a lot of animals concentrating here. The boundary is there. There's what, 500,000 acres there that every deer in the district can come from.
Correct.
So while it might have been a cattle grazing free period, there's a high probability that it's been grazed by deer who've been coming behind us. Now, as I'm looking here, I am still seeing the bites on the plants. So I don't know whether that bite came from 18 days ago or more recently, but I'm also seeing the plants are recovering in the general open area where the deer would feel safer from attack from mountain lions. Where we go over here, where, as you can see, what's this, a coyote bush?
Yep.
So this coyote bush was well and truly broken apart and opened up during the dry season, but now it's recovering. But you can see how with that heavy disturbance, the grass is now growing all the way up in it.
Yeah.
And I can still see some grazing in here, but we're getting a lot longer, better recovery. So I'm guessing that the deer have probably been coming behind the herd out there, because based on the amount of recovery here, where I'm looking at these plants being nearly a foot tall and everything like this, and no sign, and the lack of recovery there, this is leading me to believe that while we think we've had 18 days of recovery, we actually haven't. So you've got to monitor the whole and the whole ecosystem. That includes not only your livestock, but your wildlife as well. Yeah. And if you're seeing data that is contradicting itself, then there's probably another answer. Now, based on my experience, when I find well-recovered plants in the protection of a shrub and unwell recovered plants out in the open, my first thing to suspect is deer or elk grazing at night.
Yeah.
And coming up behind the herd. So that's what I think we're witnessing here.
Yep.
Okay, if you can zoom in closely here. So we're at day 23 of recovery now. And this, to the lazy eye, you would say that this hasn't been grazed. But after a bit of searching, way down here, I found one of the grazed leaves. So I don't know if the camera can see that well enough, but there's one grazed leaf down here. There's another grazed leaf way down here.
Here's one.
And there's one there. But the vast majority of this looks completely ungrazed, and that's when we say that the recovery period has been long enough to allow regrazing. However, these plants are also now getting ready for to send up their seed spikes. I'm looking at a grass over there. It looks like it's about a week away from sending up its seed spikes. So that these grasses are about to go from phase 2 into phase 3. Now, if you were just managing for the livestock's condition, you would bring the livestock back and graze this. But when you're managing the whole and you're managing the entire ecosystem, and we want these perennial grasses to get established, we need these perennials to go to seed, so that then the livestock spread seed and we gradually change from a annual predominant ranch to a perennial predominant. So while for the animals condition, it would be fine to come back and graze right now, for the overall ranches, you're going to push the recovery period all the way out to 40 days, so that these can finish their life cycle and go from phase 2 to phase 3 grazing.
Correct.
Okay, so here we've had 24 days of recovery now. Now, there are a lot of deer in this paddock because the deer are coming to come and get the best forage now. But as I look at this grass now, I'm now looking for any of those cut tips from previously, and I just can't see any. Are you seeing any, Stefan?
I'm doing my best to find some, but I'm not seeing any.
Yeah. So, yeah, this was in a valley, so this definitely would have been grazed. 24 days later, we just basically can't find any evidence that it was grazed.
Nope.
So these plants now are all finished with their recovery, and they are now pumping energy back into their roots to refill the roots. However, we're at 24 days here, so something else kicks in. So a rancher would generally say, oh, this is lovely and lush and beautiful, let's bring the cattle back here, because it's only been 24 days. But what we've learned is that while the plants have recovered in this amount of time, the soil hasn't. And we found a very interesting correlation with running animals at ultra high density, is that we found that it takes about 28 days for the bacteria to finish breaking down the dung and urine so that it doesn't smell like dung and urine. So we found that often when we bring cattle back onto a piece of land after 24 days, they turn their nose up at the forage and they won't touch it because they can smell the dung and urine in the ground still. But after 28 days, that exact same paddock, they'll happily now regraze it. So often a lot of what we are observing is stuff that we actually can't observe. Yeah, at day 24, I would say we've had 100% recovery on the grass. Now, managing for the deer, because they can now cause overgrazing, is just as important to manage your wildlife as it is to manage your what you can control with your grazing.
Yeah. Check out how tall this grass is.
Well, isn't it lovely? Eh? So I always get excited when I find a broadleaf grass, because we've kind of learned that if a grass is all leaf and it's nice broad leaves, it's doing everything it possibly can to encourage a grazing animal. So these are what we call grazing tolerant grasses. They're designed to be grazed. They need grazing animals in their life cycle. They grow really well, and if you look in the background, you can see some of the brassicas that are coming up nice and tall. But why don't you tell us a bit, has this been grazed at all this growing season?
Nope, this one's been completely ungrazed. We're saving this pasture. It should be here, excuse me, in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days.
So the cattle will be here in 5 days, and so this has had the 6 weeks since the first rains came at the 6-week drought reserve period, and then it's had about 24 days while everything else has been grazed. So everything else that has been grazed kind of would have looked like this.
Yes.
That we've been looking at the recovery periods, but so this is what it would have looked like ungrazed. Now the other part of the equation is you were feeling like you were in a drought, because you've only had 8 inches of precipitation this whole year, and your normal precipitation should be what, 18 inches? 18, 19 inches. So despite below average rainfall, because that's all it is, it's below average, with a healthy functioning, with good ground cover and your mycelial networks getting built up, it doesn't matter that it's been, what, 9 weeks since your last rain? So that's growth with 9 weeks of absolutely no rainfall. Just the stored soil moisture and a bit of dew condensing at night. So that's pretty neat.
Pretty neat.
And I think the cows are going to enjoy it when they do come in here in 5 days.
Oh yeah, they'll be stoked.
You can follow Rodger at d2gftf.com and also on his socials at Rodger Savory Holistic Management on YouTube and Facebook. We are Las Cumbres Ranch. You can follow us on social media at Las Cumbres Ranch over all platforms. And thanks for tuning in. It's been real neat.